Jay is our district superintendent of Living Waters District of the United Methodist Church. And Jay is here to share information about United Methodist Church and the disaffiliation process and all that. And thank you for joining us this morning. Jay will share, and at the end of the session, you will have the opportunity to ask any question that you might have if time allows us, because we will finish at 9:45. And Jay is always good with time, but just in case.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's nice to be with you again. I was lucky enough to be able to be a part of worship back in January. It's hard to believe that it's been that long ago. Real quick, is everyone impressed with my sport coat? Good. I'm going to take it off. So before we do anything, let's bow for word of prayer. Almighty God, thank you for bringing us together this morning. It's your day, and it's the opportunity that each of us have each and every Sunday morning to come together in the name of Christ to worship a risen Lord, to enjoy again the reminder of the fellowship of the Holy Spirit, all under the incredible watchful eye of our Father. As we gather together today, we also pray your Spirit's guidance in all that we do, and pray that this will be an opportunity for us to all learn, as well as to discern your call for each of us as we strive to be the Christian that you need us to be in this community, for your glory and for the transformation of the world. So come be with us, Lord. We thank you for all that is in front of us now, and ask your blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. Well, I think, how much time do we have?
45 minutes.
45 minutes. I thought you said it was an hour and 45 minutes. Well, I think I've been asked to come and speak a little bit about the disaffiliation process for churches that are in the process of discerning whether or not they want to remain in the United Methodist Church or not. And we'll say up front a couple of things, and I almost hate to do it this way, but I don't know about you, but I don't like labels, because labels are in many ways not full story. But sometimes we have to use labels as a way to describe situations and positions. Does that make sense? So dare we say those individuals that would be on the more right of things, quote unquote, are known as conservative or traditionalists. Everybody okay with that? And then on the left would be those that are known as a more liberal stance or progressive. And then those in the middle are called appropriately centrists or I was doing really good to that point, but my mind just went blank. Moderates, thank you. So just to give you an idea, first and foremost, before we can talk about disaffiliation now, we've got to go back in our history to the year 2012. I don't know, I'm sure there's so many of you here that are much more computer savvy than I am, but I don't know if you remember that in 2012 we were introduced, at least I was introduced to this thing called live stream, to where that particular year the General Conference was live streamed to where you could actually watch the proceedings on your computer. And I remember watching it. I believe that year may have been held in Minnesota, but don't hold me to it, or Florida, one or the other. Sue, you may know much more about it than me. But in any case, in 2012, I was so excited because it's the first time ever I got to watch the General Conference. Our General Conference is our denominational body that speaks on behalf of the church. It meets every 4 years. Delegates from every one of the conferences around the world attend. Currently, the Virginia Conference has 22 total delegates, 11 lay people and 11 clergy persons. In any case, back in 2012, as I was watching, something happened that really blew me away. In the middle of worship, there was an interruption, for lack of a better way to describe it. It was, frankly, a purposed interruption by those individuals that felt like our current discipline, at least back in 2012, that stated that human sexuality is such that homosexuality is not in line with Christian teaching, and therefore it was prohibited, so to speak, in the church. And there was an interruption of a couple of worship services by the more progressive folks, such that it really became one of those moments where, I don't know if you saw this or not, but it shocked me. I thought, what in the world is going on? Well, as it turned out, those interruptions only were for some of the worship services and experiences. The proceedings never did. Fast forward to 2016, and I'm ashamed to say that that was almost a bloodbath of just infighting between the two sides of those particular stances. Remember, we have the more conservative group on the right, and we have the more liberal, progressive group on the left, such that the entire General Conference of 2016 was pretty much locked down because there was absolutely nothing that appeared to be compromise optional. It was this stand and that stand. And have you ever been in a setting to where you just couldn't get somewhere in the middle even if you tried? And that's kind of what was going on in 2016. At some point, the proceedings were so stymied that one of the delegates, who happens to be from the Virginia Conference, stood up. And I don't know what you know about General Conference, but bishops preside. They do not vote. And so one of our folks stood up and said, "Bishops, we are at a standstill. We need you to do something." So on behalf of the betterment of the church, do something. And so, incidentally, in 2016, there was no changes to the discipline. The prohibition against homosexual living is still there. And a special called group called the Way Forward, you may have heard of that particular group, was the basis of the bishops doing something. And they met starting in 2017, and in 2019 there was a special called General Conference where a particular presentation was made called protocol. You've heard these words, right? In that special called General Conference of 2019, there was adopted a plan that would have allowed for those churches that were of a more progressive side to leave the denomination. And there was a paragraph that was added to the discipline called 2553. Now I'm sure we've all got all these numbers memorized, right? By the way, anybody here read the discipline before? Okay, it is great reading if you are having a hard time going to sleep. It is a legal book, and I don't mean to make fun of it. It is a legal book. And so it is an awful lot of legalese reading. But there was a proposal in 2019 that was passed. 2553 was an opportunity for churches that disagreed with the human sexuality portions of the discipline, which prohibits homosexuality, to be able to leave the denomination with their property and their assets, etc. There were a couple of other paragraphs added to the discipline as well that really don't apply to what we're talking about here. But in any case, everybody with me so far? They were expected in 2019 that the next year there would be a general conference. Well, here's where the story gets fun and totally crazy. You remember that in the year 2020 we were introduced to a 5-letter word we're still fighting with. COVID. Who would have ever thought we would be dealing with this word? So, the result of that is 2020 had no general conference. It was postponed to 2021. COVID was still rampant at that point, so therefore it was postponed now until 2024. Let me say a couple of things up front. Number one, because of that, the discipline has not changed. The 2016 discipline is still in effect. Okay? Everybody clear? There has been no change whatsoever to that particular issue of human sexuality. So 2553 is really what we're talking about this morning, about how a church would go about moving toward disaffiliation to their own local church. So my purposes here today is just to explain the process. We'll have questions along the way, but are we all on the same page thus far with kind of where we stand at the moment? Okay. So the first thing, according to 2553, is that a district superintendent is contacted and comes and presents the steps outlined in the discipline for the local church, or I think we have a couple of churches here this morning, right? And so this is really kind of the beginning process. And we'll leave it there for a moment. If, after we finish today, your pastor will receive a checklist of the process, so you'll have your steps that he will have to be able to direct and to engage in further conversation. By the way, this meeting is not the start of anything, it's an information meeting, okay? Everybody clear on that one? Okay. So let's say you as a church family have had this meeting and then you have decided that, well, I think we need to begin the process. So the very first thing that happens is what we will call a 30-day period of prayerful discernment. Now let me pause here and say, this is not a stock form of prayerful discernment that is handed down to you from a conference. This is a 30-day prayerful discernment plan that you create yourself. It doesn't make sense to have the conference tell you how to discern in your own local church. Does that make sense? So please know that the first step, if you choose to do anything, incidentally, you do not have to do anything past this interview or this conversation. But in any case, if you do, then you would have a 30-day period of prayerful discernment designed by your pastor or your lay team or whomever. Now, just to give you an idea, some of the churches that have done this, we had one that had a Monday night prayer meeting that involved not only a time of worship together, but also a time of silence together and a time of conversation together. Had another church where the pastor actually developed a series of devotionals for every day with lines underneath, and they would meet on a weekly basis after reading the devotional pieces and their own thoughts, and they would share. Others have done similar things, and actually Bible studies, etc. So whatever that looks like in your own context and your own understanding as to how you are best equipped for this sort of a process, that would be your decision. So you do not have to start until you want to start if you start at all. But let's say you decide you want to start. So the dean would call, he would tell me that you were starting on such and such a date, and that this would be the plan you're adopting. Does that make sense? Okay, that's step one. Now, the other part of it is a 30-day period of discernment. However, if at some point during those 30 days you decide, we're just not feeling anything now, are we obligated to continue? Can we pause? The answer is yes, you can. So in other words, this is your period of discernment that has to be at least 30 days, but there are several churches that have started and realized at the end that they're just not ready to do anything, so they just put a pause. Does that make sense? So again, it's your process, your decision. Okay. At the end of 30 days, what you would have, literally, would be a congregational straw vote. That would be a simple raise your hand at a gathering. Nadine, you would lead this. of are we interested in continuing the process? If yes, raise your hand, and then you would have a no. As long as there is a simple majority, then you continue the process. Now let me pause here and say one thing. My prayer, first of all, is that you don't even begin the process. I love being your DS, and I love being a part of Crenshaw Church. And I want you to know up front, I'm going to still love you if you decide to disaffiliate, okay? So that's not any question. However, my hope would be that if you start this process, and after 30 days of the process, I hope that your vote would not be 51 to 49. If that is your vote at that point, you just split your church. Does everybody understand? So that's my prayer as you start the process, that the Holy Spirit is very clear with what God is calling you to do as a church. So at this point, again, we're continuing with the yeses. So at this point, you have decided we're going to move forward. So the next part of this is you would begin the process of working with the conference attorney, and you would have your own attorney. And I'm going to pause. Let me go back to the 2553. It also gives the cost, or at least the basis of cost, in that paragraph. So as a 2553 paragraph disaffiliation, your costs are really four things. The first cost, if you're taking notes, the first cost is 2 years of annual conference, district conference apportionments. Okay? And this year, which you've already paid in, would count toward that. The second part would be your particular part of the retiree health benefit and retiree benefit portion of your apportionments as well for 2 years. The reason for this, by the way, this is retirees, not current, but only those that have already served and are now retired. And this protects them. One of the aspects of the trust clause, which most all United Methodist churches are held in trust, their deeds, for the purpose of making sure that there is funding available to continue the health/pension benefits for our retirees. Just a quick, how much time we got? Okay, good. Just a little bit of fun, no extra charge for this one. There is one church not too far from us now on the Living District that predates the trust clause. That church was started in the late 1700s. Anybody ever heard of Mount Gilead Methodist Church? I know one of us has. Anybody heard of Pocahontas State Park in Chesterfield County? If you look at a state map of Virginia, you'll see Pocahontas State Park, right, kind of a Kelly green color, with the exception of one white dot over in the 3 o'clock area of that particular map. That is Mount Gilead Church, surrounded by Pocahontas State Park, and yet it is the oldest, still open, not quite open, Methodist church in Virginia County. So they're not under trust laws. Well, I don't think we have to worry about them disaffiliating because it's only 2 people left. But we'll talk to them later. But anyways, back where we were. At this point, the cost would be 2 years of apportionments, as well as the pension liability and health liability for retirees. Is that clear? The other part of the cost to you would be the cost of your attorney that you will need to hire to represent you and to begin the process of redeeming your property, and the cost of the conference attorney. And someone said, well, how come we're paying for the conference attorney? Well, quite honestly, the decision was made based on the fact that does it make sense for those churches who remain United Methodist to pay for a church to leave? By the way, there's a flat fee of $3,000, so it's not $50,000. Now, the other part of the conversation regarding cost will wind up being your pastor. We will talk about the fact that a disaffiliation happens for a church, but it also is a decision that a pastor will make as well. So we clear so far? Okay. So let's say, again, the results of the straw poll are a huge majority. Again, I don't want a middle. And that you want to begin the process. So at that point, your attorney will meet with the conference attorney. By the way, do you all own or have a cemetery that's part of your property? Let me give you one other horror story. And also invite you to be thinking about if this is something you decide to do, how do you do what you do? We have a church on our district that I met with a year or so ago. There were 5 people left, still are. And in chatting with them, this church is gorgeous, but it is 3/4 surrounded by the cemetery. And of the 5 people remaining, I asked them at some point, I don't even know why I asked them, but I did. And I said, do you all have a cemetery fund? And they said, well, oh yes. By the way, the average age of the people that were there were probably over 75. Oh yes, I'm going to tell you, I breathed. And then for some reason or another, I asked the next question, and I said, how much is in your cemetery fund? And they said, oh, $50. There were at least 300 tombstones. And so I asked the question, I said, what are you doing for that? And they said, well, we're sending letters out to people who have family members buried. And I said, good. And so this is my opportunity to say that as you begin a process, if you get to that point of redeeming yourself, if you had a cemetery, I was going to say, make sure you deed the cemetery separately and incorporate it. Does that make sense? The other part of it is you will need your own attorney to work for you because you will need to be incorporated because you'll need an EIN number that will be part of the transfer, et cetera. And also now you will be connected with the government as well. Questions on that? At the point where the agreement is being finalized, the attorneys have worked, and incidentally, as we think about changing to a different denomination or being independent, one of the things, how old is Crenshaw? When did it start? Okay. Is it 100 years old? More than 100 years. Okay. So let's say it's 125 years, just for kicks. So over 125 years, Crenshaw Church has been Methodist, and we know how to do Methodist well. But we have 2 decisions to make regarding, or many decisions you want to make. If you decide to disaffiliate, you have decisions to make regarding whether or not you want to become aligned with another denomination or become independent. Right? One of the things that your attorney will need to help you do if you decide to become independent is who will you be? How will you set yourself up? How will you organize yourself? Obviously, you'll have some sort of an administrative body. You'll have some sort of ministerial body. You'll have to have trustees for your legal parts, right? So how would you do that? And then the other part, how would you call or elect a pastor if you become, say, independent? Now, if you align yourself with another denomination, there is a Methodist labor denomination that I think has already been here before, the Global Methodist Church. By the way, let me pause and say, regarding the Global Methodist Church, I've had a handful of phone calls over the last several months asking how come you all haven't recognized the Global Methodist Church. And I said, well, by recognize, do you mean knowing that they exist, or do you connecting with the United Methodist Church. If it's the second, no, we have not recognized them, not because we don't believe they exist, but because the only group that can officially recognize another Methodist denomination and welcome it into fellowship is the General Conference. Well, guess what hasn't happened since 2016? So from a legal perspective, they are not recognized, and the earliest they would be recognized is 2024. Does that make sense? There's some misunderstanding about how come you all aren't. We haven't met yet and won't meet until 2024. So, a couple of other things that will be part of this conversation, excuse me, is once your attorney and the conference attorney have reached whatever that number is, and incidentally, you would know that particular number. It's called a Taylor Disaffiliation number. There was a Ms. Taylor at the 2019 General Conference that proposed this piece of legislation, and those cost factors that I just shared is known as the Taylor Disaffiliation number. Remember, it's 2 years of conference apportionments and the pension liability for retirees and the health retirees. So that particular number would be part of the final cost as well as the cost of the attorneys. The other part of the cost could be, depending on the decision that, in this case, your pastor here, the dean would make. If the dean decides that he does not want to disaffiliate, then we as a cabinet will do everything we can to find an appointment for him from that point on of disaffiliation until the next annual conference year. And if we are not able to find an appointment at his current salary level, or if we can only find an appointment at a lower level, then the church would be responsible for whatever that gap would be for that period of time until the end of the annual conference. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to you too? Okay, great. Okay. Once the decision, or rather the paperwork has been completed with the attorneys, we would then have a church conference. Church conference and charge conference are the two ways that United Methodist churches do business. We know a charge conference very well, and matter of fact, we have one coming up over the next 6 weeks here. That is made up of members of your administrative church council or board, whatever you call it, as well as your trustees, as well as your pastor and any retired pastors or deacons that are part of your church family. Right? And that's the annual charge conference where we adopt budgets and leadership, et cetera, et cetera. A church conference differs in that every professing member of your church is invited to come and they have a vote. So this means everyone that is literally a member, a professing member. There are two different types of memberships in United Methodism. The first one is called a baptized member, and these would be usually children under the age of 12 or until they become confirmed. Does that make sense? A professing member is every person that has been confirmed or baptized and confirmed at the same time, an adult in the eyes of the church. Okay? So we would have the church conference where the resolution would be brought before you. You would know the Taylor Disaffiliation cost to you as a church when you begin the 30-day period of prayerful discernment. So it makes no sense to have a 30-day period of discernment when you really don't know what the cost is, does it? So you would get that when you begin that process. So those figures, along with the attorney fees, potentially pastor fees, would all be part of the church conference that would be held. And in that particular church conference, the resolution cost would be announced again. Church members would vote by ballot. I tell folks this all the time. The ballot will actually be the resolution to vote on, and then a yes or a no slide. I'm taking back to my days as a second grader when there was a pretty girl. Guys, you remember that? On the other side of the room, the son would vote. You know, I like you like me, and you always put a yes or a no. So they made sure that they knew they had a chance. Mine always came back no. But anyway, so the church conference would be the presentation, any further debate or discussion, and then there would be a vote. During the process of the voting to move forward with the attorneys, we would also at that point require from the church a list of membership, all of the deeds, a copy by the way of each, and would love to also have copies of marriage and baptism records. And the reason for the other part is you'd be surprised how many times the conference center gets a phone call about whether or not they have records for XYZ person's baptism and marriage and that sort of thing. But the membership record is going to be vital, because at the call church conference, what will actually happen is we will have your membership record, and each person that is a member of the church will come forward. There will be, most likely, it'll be Phyllis, who is still part of our Living Waters district, has been Farmville administrative assistant for well over 35 years or so. And they would come up and give the name, and Phyllis would literally check off their name based on the membership list. They would get a ballot, and it would be, again, a paper ballot. You would fill it out, drop it in the ballot box when you're finished, and then when it's over, and everyone's had a chance to vote, myself and the secretary, and then someone from the church as well, as kind of an audit, would add up the votes. And the vote has to be 2/3 majority of those who vote. The vote also is only in person. So if you are a professing member and you're not able to attend, there's no absentee ballot. Does that make sense? So it's everyone who is there. If the vote is 2/3 affirmative, then you are officially beginning the process of being disaffiliated. And at that point, your trustees, by the way, that would be the other part of the information prior, would be the list and address of all of your trustees. I am discovering also that there are some of our churches that have not updated their trustee listing. The same church that I was telling you about with the cemetery, they had 5 trustees, and every one of them were dead. So this is a horror story, I realize, but unfortunately it's a reality story too. So part of the process would be to make sure that your trustees are updated and registered with the courthouse. Does that make sense? So that would be a part of the finalization. Would be the trustees would sign the agreement. The conference attorney has already done his work. And then the last part of this is, because the discipline requires that any church that disaffiliates must be ratified by the annual conference. So as a result of that, there will still be a special called annual conference for those churches that are disaffiliated. There is one coming up at the end of October for those who have already started this process. We anticipate that there will be at least 2 or 3 next year as well. Everything has to be completed. All the paperwork has to be done 30 days before that annual conference. Does that make sense? Okay. So the other part that I think I have failed to share is, the paragraph that we are using, 2553, ends or expires December 31st, 2023, which is next year. Now, someone said, well, how come is that? Well, I don't know, I'm not telling you. But my guess is that because this particular paragraph was added to the discipline in 2019, they expected that in 2020 this mess would be addressed. And so that would give any church who wanted to move through the process 4 years to do it. Well, here we are. So the ultimate question then is being asked is, well, what do we do if we don't disaffiliate by the end of next year? Good question. Let me go back to the beginning and say, remember at this point, and nothing will change this, nothing has changed in our discipline regarding our particular stance with homosexuality. It is still inconsistent with Christian living, which is our policy. If anything changes, it won't change until 2024's General Conference. And even then, we don't know. The irony is, in the special called 2019 General Conference, the paragraph that is being used was put forward because at that point they believed that many of the progressive churches would be disaffiliated. The individuals that kind of melded that particular paragraph were the more conservative folks, which is interesting too. I don't know. People ask all the time, what's going to happen at the end of December next year? I don't know, except for the fact that in 7 months we'll have another General Conference. My guess is that if the General Conference of 2019 worked hard to provide an amicable way for a church to disaffiliate, anticipating that in a few short months it would all happen, that same body would also do the same sort of thing. I don't know that for sure. I can't say that now. All I can say is that if history is any predictor of the future, most likely what happened then will continue to happen at the next one in 2024. But as of now, nothing's changed. Nothing will change if it changes until 2024, and we're not guaranteed it'll change at all. Okay. So you've done your 2/3. You have also gone to the annual conference and it's been ratified. Once that is done, then you are disaffiliated as a church. And the requirements then would be you would remove all outside signage that would indicate that you are a United Methodist. So the cross and flame would come down. You keep your hymnals, other thing else. Just what is it that your church exemplifies as the United Methodist Church would have to be taken down. I spent a lot of time talking. Do you have questions for clarity purposes? Yes, sir.
In the beginning, you said, I think in 2016, that it was stated that if the progressives elected to disaffiliate, that this is their avenue. This is their avenue of doing it.
That was the original
And the
point.
book of discipline has not changed.
That is correct. The discipline has not changed.
As of today.
And forgive me, I'm glad you asked me that question because that slipped my mind. There was a judicial council. By the way, our Supreme Court for United Methodism is called the Judicial Council. They ruled a year ago that this same paragraph, 2553, could be used by any particular group that disagrees with human sexuality. So it was began as a progressive type of opportunity, but now traditional churches, quote unquote, again, I hate labels, but you know what I mean. So, yes, sir. But nothing has changed in the discipline regarding our stance on human sexuality.
Looks like they would need to take place where it might just have a general call of Congress and decide this thing once and for all. And then the church knows where it stands, where it needs to disaffiliate will say.
Yeah, I think I heard most of what you said regarding it looks like we need a general conference to make the decision. Is that what you were saying?
You need to have a general conference to decide this issue once and for all. Yeah, the church knows whether to proceed with disaffiliation.
That's kind of my thinking too. That'll happen in 2024, unless, you know what, it's gonna happen in 2024. I'm not gonna use the word unless, we're gonna make it happen, I'm sure. But yes, sir, that is already scheduled. How do I answer that? What he just said is the best thing for you all to do is sit still. Okay. Can I take you out to supper tonight? You have to make your decision. So I don't know that it would be prudent for me to say, I totally agree with what you're saying, but I think what you just put forward is worthy of conversation. Thank you.
What I mean is do not, I don't mean, just do not.
Well, there's nothing that has changed at this point, and it won't change even if it changes until 2024. I'll stop there. There's somebody else got a question here.
I did have a question, but you probably answered it. As far as United Methodist Men, I guess they have to disassociate that name. What about the funds and their treasurer?
The United Methodist Men, I would say, you talk about for Crenshaw, correct? I would say that part of that process of the disaffiliation means that those funds would still be with the church. That wouldn't be taken away from you any more than I would imagine it would be with Women in Faith United. Is that the right word? Yes. Ladies, thank you. Yes. I've never had that question before. Thank you. I haven't even considered it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
How many churches in the old Farmville district have applied or made a known that they're looking at getting that?
I'll have to say that I have had almost 30 of these meetings with churches all around our big district now. And I'm delighted to do it only because it kind of helps with churches that are discerning. And so to answer your question, we have at this point about 30 different churches that have heard this presentation. And we will be having 4 that will be voting to disaffiliate in the next week. And that's in our district. But I don't want to get too detailed with churches, but under 12, I think, generically speaking, for the entire conference. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
To disaffiliate, it's going to be costly. You got a couple of years of your health, you got a couple of years of your retirement, you've got attorney costs, you're going to have probably attorneys to transfer the property, all of that. You may have to have a survey. This would be the property of the church itself, plus the parsonage, plus you would also have to pay back. We've got a $10,000 plus grant when we put on the addition that it is still owed. It's on file. There's a lien on the property here. So it's going to be costly to do that. Plus, we've got personnel costs that we have to pay for the preacher. And what else?
You just nailed it. Forgive me for not remembering the loans grants.
Forget it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It would be around time to church.
Yes, it would. It would. That's a great point. Frankly, the employee portion would only be for those that are appointed here. The other employees are employees of your church.
We have to find our own preacher too at that point, wouldn't we?
Depending on how you align yourself, that is certainly a possibility. Yes, sir. Good questions. Any others? Nadine, how are we doing on time? Okay.
45. 9:45.
Okay. Any other? I would give Nadine a copy of the steps that I described, which is probably a whole lot better than the way I just described it, but in any case. thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. And you have my phone number, call if there's anything.
Yes.
Would you do me a favor, would you close this in prayer?
Let us pray, and then we can take a 5 minutes break if you need to the restroom, and then come back. We'll begin our worship at 10 as usual. Let's go to God and pray. Holy and gracious God, we thank you for this day, this morning, and God, thank you for all of those who are here to receive this information and to, as you call them, to discern in the future, discern as the local church which direction to go. And God, we thank you for Jay, who took time and for his care and love for this church and for all other churches and for the denomination and his willingness to come and share this information out of love and just to present. So God, we give everything in your hands. I ask that you continue to guide this body of yours, continue as they continue to discern. I ask that you guide them. All this we pray in your Son's name.